Okay, welcome. We've started the meeting and the recording. Thank you for joining us online. We do have a quorum, so we'll go ahead and get started, but we're expecting Commissioner Dean to join us shortly. So we'll go ahead and get started with a few administrative updates and attendance. Second. We'll just run through attendance quickly. Commissioner Montgomery, Commissioner McCullough.
Present.
Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Dean, we're waiting for Commissioner Miller.
Here.
Commissioner Evans here. Commissioner Ortiz.
Here.
Wonderful. Okay, with the physical quorum, we can go ahead and get started. For administrative purposes, I did want to take a minute to thank the members of the team here today. Recognizing that we have doubled our meetings and, been kind of plowing through a process that's completely new to us and building more operational maturity with each iteration. I know we still have some kind of procedural timelines to formalize and working with ACPD to work out how we can best handle these different kinds of cases and timelines. I'm really, really grateful at how much everyone has stepped up, not just, reviewing the evidence and talking through the policies, but especially this week with help with discussion plans. So that's, increasing our bandwidth to be able to make this a little bit more streamlined. So I'm going to have our co-investigation leads lead the discussion tonight. I also want to acknowledge the progress that we've made with ACPD, where we have an open rapport. And, while we have a few complex issues outstanding collaboratively, we have built a process through which we can, kind of share our perspectives and figure out. That's scary. That you, Gary? Maybe not. I know that we have an outstanding meeting request that we haven't addressed, and so I want to acknowledge that that's in the wings. I know that from the MOU stakeholder perspective, we have a lot of different kind of topics swirling and trying to bring order and operational maturity to those in parallel to this process. Our priority as directed by the board is to get this backlog cleared out. And now we have, we have been doubling our meetings and iterating our reporting process to get to a place of operational maturity where I think this is getting more reliable, more predictable, and easier. But I do welcome everyone's feedback on, what timeline, how much time, y'all need. I know that going through the OPR reports takes a lot of time. I know going through evidence takes a lot of time. So as we get to kind of the end of this, what I'm going to just call our first sprint, getting through this backlog in June, we would like to put some of those timelines on paper so that we have a little bit more predictability in when do we expect to know which case we're going to review and, yada, yada, yada. So recognizing that it's been a little bit agile and nimble to get us to this point, we are kind of under the gun for clearing out the backlog and on track to do that. So the bad news is that leaves several items unaddressed. I mentioned the ACPD request for a meeting. We still have not had community engagement opportunities for lack of time and resources. We also want to acknowledge that in multiple of the public reviews, we've talked about ACPD's request for our support in developing policies or best practices around bias-free policing. And so we had identified an expert that we would like to engage who can bring some best practice to the table for conversation. And then, the COB's consideration of recommended policies, but we haven't gotten approval to use our budget resources to do so. So all that's to say, administratively, I think we're making progress. I think that our schedule is on track to meet our kind of county directives, and hopefully that opens up some opportunity over the summer for some process refinement and to get to these outstanding issues. So while we wait a little bit more for Gary, I'll see if anyone on the board has questions or input. Process so far. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and get started. Charles, I think you're going to kick us off with investigation 78 for the board's review. If you want to lead our summary, and then we'll go to Mummy and Albert to add some context.
Sure, that's perfect. People are familiar, so I'll just kind of briefly go through the two incidents that make up this one complaint. One November 9th, the other November 17th. November 9th, 2023, a black male was followed to his home by one officer, a white male, and a second officer, a white female. Both of the officers were part of the department's community action team, CAT team, or CAT. The officers were on patrol in the Green Valley neighborhood. That's where the CAT team operates. They were informed by another officer of a suspect that was known to carry firearms, was on probation, and they believed that they would be able to find the suspect driving a black two-door Mercedes. So, as the officers were carrying out their duties that evening, they did observe two vehicles that matched that description, a black Mercedes, at least that part of the description. Officer one decided to follow the vehicles. They came to an intersection. The one vehicle turned left, the other did not. The officer made a decision to follow the vehicle that turned left. Did so without confirming the driver's identity or the vehicle's registration. But continuing to pursue the vehicle, officer one followed that vehicle to where it parked. Later, we come to find out that where it parked was the complainant's home. Officer one did not immediately initiate a traffic stop at that point. Officer two arrived shortly thereafter to serve as backup. Officer two initiated the stop by approaching the complainant, who was seated in the vehicle in his driveway. Officer two questioned the registration of the complainant's vehicle, stating that the tags were improper, without providing any further clarification when pressed by the complainant to explain, what does that mean. So the situation continues to unfold. It became apparent that Officer one had not verified the vehicle's tags through dispatch. The information then came to light during this interaction between the complainant, who says my registration is valid, the Officer one who states that it's improper. And as the situation develops, the Officer one subsequently confirms with dispatch that the complaint's registration was indeed valid. So Officer two, having been informed of valid registration, issued a brief. And so Officer one is informed of this, tells Officer two. Officer two, having been informed of valid registration, does issue a brief kind of monotone apology, kind of under the breath apology, while also handing the complainant her badge number and her information that both of the officers, one fell swoop there. At that, the officers left the scene without any further engagement, and that entire exchange pretty much lasted as long as it told me to tell you about that entire exchange, about 3 minutes. So a little shorter than some of the other things that we review. But the complainant did later contact ACPD to report feeling harassed and to claim that the officers were trespassing on his property, because that was tied to event number 2, which happened just a few days later, November 17th, 2023. So the complainant describes that what he observed was a white male officer who was parked in a convenience store that was still in that Green Valley neighborhood. And the officer briefly followed the complainant and then continued driving, only to, and during this time, the complainant kind of pulls over. The officer then kind of rounds back around to where the complainant was parked. And then the complainant in this instance approaches the officer to inquire why he was being followed. And the officer indicated that there was no such issue or anything, and subsequently drove away. The OPR did not investigate this second incident, as the officer did not stop or detain the complainant, but simply replied to the question that the complainant had. Later that evening, a ranking officer does call the complainant because the complainant submits a complaint. So the ranking officer does have a phone conversation with the complainant. The complainant expresses the dissatisfaction with interactions with ACPD. During that call, the officer does, offer sincere apologies on behalf of officers, on behalf of department. The officer acknowledges that there has been a high level of turnover in ACD, leading to, attrition, younger officers, and suggested that additionally could benefit less experienced officers in handling such calls. And furthermore, the officer, went to lengths to, say that he didn't, defend or condone the way that interaction unfolded, and notingly said, it's important to take responsibility for mistakes, and that that officer would work with, educating, training, counseling the involved officers and others with improving the communication or miscommunication that led to the immediate incident. And I think, one thing that sticks with me on the last part of this communication is something that we've heard a lot, but this particular officer took to heart and wanted to convey to the complainant, is the belief that all interactions between police and community should be positive, and again was apologetic as interaction failed to meet those standards. So there you go.
I'll add two things. One, you might have said this, but just for context, that the initial stop was based on a vehicle description.
Correct.
Because of a known firearm carrier.
Correct.
Who was actually on probation. Maybe you said that.
Yes.
But the other piece of that then being that the kind of initial pursuit by Arlington County officers was based on a vehicle description, not a description of a person.
That is correct, and thank you for clarifying that, because I did mention that it was based on, even though the subject was known, it was primarily based on the description of the vehicle, and that description being a black two-door Mercedes.
And then before we go to Mummy and Captain Kim, I want to just point out that the two policy violations being investigated were bias-free policing and constitutional rights.
Right.
And so we're, kind of looking at the facts around whether or not there was, personal bias in initiating the instance, or whether or not the kind of constitutional procedure in interacting with the person based on that suspicion. So Mummy, I'll turn it to you for additional comments.
Oh, I'm sorry, Julie.
Yeah.
Since you did mention the nature of the description, it's probably worth noting that the description was a black two-door Mercedes, with I believe those were temporary tags. The complainant drove a black four-door Mercedes, permanent tags, handicap.
Thank you.
I don't have much to add factually regarding this investigation, but I did want to just touch on a couple quick things just before I'll start with the constitutional rights one, because less comments about that one than the bias-free policing one. I exonerated on both officers for constitutional rights because it did appear to be a legal and proper within policy stop. And at no point during the interaction did I find any evidence that the complainant constitutional rights were violated. That's not to say that, I think we've all acknowledged that, this was a mistaken identity, or, it was a wrongful stop in that sense, but not from a constitutional law perspective. It seemed that there was also like a little bit of a mix-up where, the first officer comes and kind of is positioning himself, maybe assumingly to actually start running the tags and go through whatever the procedure was. And the second officer comes up and then kind of is like assessing the situation, because she thinks that the person who's in the driveway is this potential, known firearms person and, potentially on probation. And she's getting increasingly concerned that Officer 1 hasn't initiated a traffic stop because this person is, parked in their driveway in the vehicle. And so she kind of goes from being backup to then being the officer who initiates the traffic stop, which I think just in terms of a timeline probably impacted, but I'm just making a reasonable educated guess here. It impacted Officer 1's maybe ability to have run the tags first before initiating the stop, which is what would normally happen in the course of this. That does not take away from the fact that the complainant was obviously upset, and rightfully so, that it was probably embarrassing for the complainant to have 2 cars in front of his driveway in his neighborhood with neighbors onlooking, and there's all these police lights on, and he's looking like he's done something really bad, and actually all he did was pull into his driveway. So I think, taking all of those factors into consideration, it made sense to me why things happened the way it did. I still think that there was some, there's probably some just tightening of the, I guess you could say, like, cross-team communication that could happen. And then obviously, like, the failure to apologize at the end and kind of acknowledge what had happened, I think is another training opportunity. As far as the bias-free policing went, I think one other thing that I wanted to just point out about the policy and how it's written is that, let me just share my screen real quick. Actually, I don't have share ability. It seems it's very high security these days, but essentially it lists out a couple of different ways in which like a couple of situations bias-free policing for the policy comes into effect. And so essentially a traffic stop has to be conducted, or potentially someone has to be asked for their consent to be searched. My screen kind of, oh, there it is. I can share now. Okay, perfect.
Been granted permission.
I've been granted. Thank you, Ian. So, right here in section 3, subsection A1, it lists about 6 different scenarios. I think that the policy contemplates conducting a stop, deciding whether to initiate a consensual encounter, search, conducting a non-consensual search, seizure of property, or establishing either reasonable suspicion or probable cause. So in this situation, we have for the November 9th incident, conducting a traffic stop. I take a kind of broad interpretation of conducting a traffic stop, which means like what happens from when it's initiated to when it's completed. I don't know if the policy intends for it to just be like the grounds for stopping someone or initiating a traffic stop, but just wanted to put it out there that my interpretation of it, conducting, is from beginning to end. So with that being said, when I looked at this stop, I looked at both the reason for stopping, which did not seem to be, or there was no evidence to say that there was a biased reason for stopping the vehicle. However, I did think that there could be more questions asked in terms of how the stop was conducted, or just the kind of assessment as to whether or not that person needed to be apologized to, or how they were, treated during the stop. And I think just because of the grounds that the complainant says that he was followed and harassed, and that the officers kind of mistreated him during the stop. Essentially, to me, that spoke to me in the sense that he felt like he was dehumanized. And I spoke to in my report why I think that there could have been more questions asked. We've been having a continuous conversation about kind of how to expand bias-free policing investigation. It's certainly my recommendation that we continue to work through like what kind of questions to be asked, and how we should interpret answers that are being given, or how a complainant is articulating what their sentiments were in terms of how they were feeling during the traffic stop or during the encounter. And it's been my recommendation that we, consult with an expert to do that, just broadly speaking. In this situation, I chose to not sustain it because I didn't think that there was any evidence one way or another to prove or disprove that there was absolutely no bias implied at any point during the stop. The second thing I wanted to point out about the policy was as it relates to the second incident that happened on November 17th, where the complainant alleged that he had been followed, and he thought that the officer that was following him was running his tags, but did not then end up initiating a traffic stop, stopping the person or asking for any sort of consensual encounter or initiated an encounter. I think the issue with that is the way that that particular incident was disposed of in this investigation was that essentially that officer did not do anything. You know, essentially the complainant rolled up on the officer and asked him after feeling like he'd been followed for some time, you know, is there a problem or, you know, is there something wrong? And the officer responded no. So it's true that the officer did not initiate a stop or initiate an encounter. The complainant actually initiated the encounter, but the way the policy is written doesn't what the complainant was complaining about, which was that he felt like the officer had been harassing him. And I think it's true that it's possible for an officer, not saying that that's what happened here because we didn't investigate that incident, so I can't say one way or another, but it is possible hypothetically for someone to be harassed or feel harassed without an actual stop being initiated or an encounter being initiated. So I think that in that regard, we weren't able to address the complainant's concern incident, I think, because of the way that the policy is written. And that's unfortunate, but I don't think that is, you know, at anyone's fault. It's just the way the policy is written. I would just make a recommendation that we consider expanding the policy to include things that can happen before or after an actual encounter begins or ends. And that's it, please.
Thank you. Albert, I'm going to ask you maybe to just give us a little bit of background on the community action team.
Oh, that, you know what? Deputy Chief Chamberlain is here. I'll let her speak to that.
Stellar.
Thank you.
So the community action team is a team that was formed that is a temporary assignment. It's not something that's long-term or permanent. So everyone who was assigned to this team was assigned on a 28-day temporary assignment. So what the goal was, we pulled from all 6 squads, as you guys know, we have 6 squads, one person because we don't have the staff to make it a permanent piece. And it was to address concerns throughout the county. And I think one thing you said was like specifically Green Valley. No, it's throughout the county where they did things literally on every portion of the county that was supported by the crime analysis or by requests from the community themselves. So typically, I think this may have been early on in this group of 6's time together. So it is a little difficult to do the communication, the normal communication that you know of someone's action, of how they respond, not as an excuse, but that is generally, you know, I can tell you, because I work with Albert, I can tell you probably what Albert's going to eat for lunch today. But they can't do that or what they do eat. So, but this team in itself, that's where their focus was. Obviously, during that particular time, they always operated with a minimum of 4 people and a supervisor that was directly working with that group. So it was 6 officers or corporals and then 1 supervisor who focused on working whatever was needed at that particular time.
Okay, thank you. I think we also, and Charles and I were coordinating on the tail end of this, we're just going to call them officer to avoid rank identifiability, but the officer who interviewed the complainant and was involved in that interaction did a much better job being proactive in, and Charles, you may want to speak specifically to what you called out, but you know, being very warm, being very comprehensive, not making excuses. And so there was like a lot of really positive behavior in that follow-up encounter that was warranted by the, you know, kind of maybe flatter attempt at an apology on the front end of the encounter. So
Correct.
we did want to call that out in our summary.
I echo that. He did an excellent job.
You did a very good job, an excellent job. I do have a few questions about the CAT team, but it's probably because that's kind of an addendum to this. We should probably just go through this first and then we can.
Yeah, I just wanted to have some
Yeah,
kind of
that's perfect.
what that is from
Yeah.
these.
Yeah, so let me just start with this, which is basically to say, you know, I always like to find areas of common ground, and there are a lot actually between the IPA's report and our report. There's a lot of similarities, and I think at the tail end of our report, what you'll see is this acknowledgement by both officers that they probably could have handled the end of that traffic stop a little bit better. And they understand that. That was expressed to them that night, obviously by that officer who spoke to the complainant that evening. And then during the interview, if you had an opportunity to listen to those interviews, they expressed that, we expressed that to them, kind of like poking them with those questions to be like, hey, if you had a chance to do this over again, do you think you might have done a little bit better job? And they acknowledged that. So I think there is a understanding amongst everyone on the PD side that just could have been handled a little better. Let's go back to sort of the first point, which is the constitutional rights thing that you brought up. Thank you for doing that. And, you know, I don't want to talk too much about this because our findings are very similar. But I do want to say the one piece that we kind of already talked about, which is this communication and how, and I think, Mummy, you did a pretty good job of explaining how there's a lot of moving pieces and they're happening almost at the same time. And then, you know, one person is trying to reposition their vehicle, but they're actually probably doing that and wanting to type the tag in the car. But at the same time, the other officer is looking at this officer saying, hey, what are you doing? This person is dangerous. Let's go up to them and sort of, you know, see what they're doing. So thank you for acknowledging that. And I think you mentioned this, Charles, too. There are two vehicles of similar make, model, color that are traveling literally on the same road at the same time, and the officer has to make a decision which vehicle has the dangerous armed person in it. One is going straight, one is turning left. I'm just going to flip a coin and I'm going to go with the one that's left. It matches the description that I've been provided by my fellow officers. So I know I have reasonable articulable suspicion to stop this car. I believe that there is a dangerous person who is operating a vehicle that is improperly registered at the time. One small note is that the temporary tag discovery did not occur until after they had stopped the car. So that was alerted to them after the fact. They did not know that suspect vehicle had a temporary tag. To them, it's just two-door black Mercedes, as you mentioned before. The temporary tag was not alerted to them until afterwards. But so now let me go to this second piece and about bias-free policing. And, you know, you brought up a point about, you know, conducting, the policy says, as kind of referred to as conducting a traffic stop. And, you know, I would say that's the same. I would agree with you that the entire traffic stop, you have to ensure that you are complying with the bias-free policing policy. It's not just the reason for a traffic stop. It is the entire stop itself from start to finish. You should not be saying anything inappropriate. That would be maybe indicate that you had some bias, and you should not be doing anything inappropriate that would indicate that you were doing something biased related. And so I do agree with you that it is the entire length of the traffic stop. Now, where I maybe differ from you a little bit is that this sort of half-hearted apology that takes place, can I connect that to bias-free? And I don't remember, Charles, I think you brought this up. The complainant is adamant that the officers exit his property immediately. He says, you're trespassing. I want you off my property right now. And he makes it very clear that he does not want to interact with the police officers anymore. And so as police officers, you have to make a decision. Do I remain here and try to sort of explain our position, you know, and perhaps get this individual more angry, or do I say, okay, look, this is what he wants me to do, and I exit the property as quickly as I possibly can? They made that decision. They probably should have had some follow-up with them, at least talk to someone or done the best they can to manage that as much as possible. Does that amount to bias-free policing? It just doesn't. And for us, it just doesn't. It doesn't come close to that. It doesn't, not doing a good enough apology just does not when someone is yelling at you to get off their property. If that piece wasn't there, maybe we could have looked into it a little bit more. But when someone is yelling at you to get off their property, there's a lot of mitigating circumstances around that. To your point about the second interaction that takes place probably post this incident, where there's this encounter, I wouldn't even say encounter, I guess this sort of crossing of paths of the complainant and another officer. So I just want to point out that OPR, it's not that we didn't investigate it, because we did look into who was driving the car. We had to figure that out. We believe we identified the officer who had this interaction with the complainant because, that's a vehicle number. We look who's driving that car. We have to understand and accept, okay, how did this thing come about? Like, how did this encounter take place? He believes that he was followed, right? He believes that he was followed. He then asks the officer, flags them down, says, hey, are you following me? No, there's no issue here. I'm not following you. And then he drives away. I mean, for us, that did not meet a criteria where we felt it was appropriate to do an investigation and call somebody in for an interview for that. We know that there's not going to be video of that because it's not a consensual encounter, and it's not a law enforcement encounter. So we're not going to activate our camera for that. It's just like me walking outside of here and then someone coming up to me asking me for directions, and I tell them, hey, it's over here. There's not going to be any video to that. So we did not look at that or investigate that incident because it's really not a police encounter. This is someone who's asked a question to an officer and that officer gave them an answer and then sort of drove away, and they believe that they were followed. Doesn't mean that they were. So that's our position there. Do you have anything else? But overall, like I said, a lot of cross similarities with this, these two investigative reports. That's it. That's all I got.
Thank you. From my standpoint, I think you addressed this a little bit in the, CAT team being run a little bit differently and not in as much coordination. It does feel uncomfortable to me that she said improper tags to the person without really knowing that. But understanding that seems like part of the initial incident. I think if I were to be stopped twice in, a couple, or if I felt like I was being policed, in that same time period, I could understand why the complainant sensitivity might be that I'm being targeted in some unfair way. So I also want to acknowledge that I think that perception or that sensitivity is understandable. Even if that doesn't seem to be the intention behind any of these activities. So I'll open it up to the board to see if anyone has clarifying questions or other opinions to offer on kind of the facts and the interactions.
I just have a question on the initial information that was conveyed from the CAT team to the officers who made the stop.
They're all on the CAT team together.
Okay.
They're all on the CAT team together. So one CAT officer is telling the other CAT officers, hey, I just saw this car. Here's the description. It belongs to so-and-so. He's not a good person. He likes to carry guns and he's on active probation.
Okay.
And his car is improperly registered.
Okay, so, but they didn't learn about the temporary tags until they stopped their car, or that came in later?
Well, the challenge being that they didn't run the tag. They decided which of two vehicles to follow.
Right.
And didn't run those tags. And so they shared with the community member that they believed their tags were improper without having run those tags.
Because
Right.
they knew at the time that there was something communicated to them about the tags. Sounds like
The vehicle description.
But the vehicle.
The vehicle.
So, in my recollection of what was written, how the officers recounted what was told to them, at some point earlier, they were told that there's this person that we know may be up to nefarious things because of the history that they have. And we also know that this person drives a car that looks like this, and this same car has improper registration. So to the extent that we're looking for him, if he is in this car and we know this car has improper registration, we can pull over this car. This car is a black Mercedes that has 2 doors. And what happens is at some point later, so this wasn't an immediate thing. This wasn't, an all points bulletin. Hey, guess what I just saw? It was, hey, this is something that we know. Be on the lookout as we patrol this area. Then at a certain point, the officer spots 2 cars that are very similar to this description. Now, complainant's car is 4 doors, not 2, but they're both black Mercedes. So we have that part. But what didn't happen is a running of a license plate on either of these vehicles to determine. So what we had is someone say, you know what, I didn't run them yet, but I have 2 right here. So let me choose this one. And then we proceed with the car getting to its home. And in between making the decision to go left, go to the home, plates were not run.
And then the second officer who initiates the stop communicates to the person that we pulled you over for improper
No, no,
tag.
yeah,
right.
So that was the.
As a certainty as opposed to
Right.
a presumption
Right.
that this may be the car.
Right,
It was
right.
moved in as in this.
Yeah, and I don't have any
Yeah.
real concerns with the two officers doing what they did in terms of the policies. Notwithstanding that, as you acknowledge, that it could be better and so forth. But I mean, anyway, but I mean, I did want to just sort of understand for sure the communication link, which is kind of arguably not in our province, but just how that worked, because they knew the person in the vehicle, so they knew that person, but that wasn't what was communicated. What was communicated was the car and that there was some problem with the registration.
Correct.
Yeah.
And if you listen to Officer One's interview, at no point is he able to get close enough to the car that he is
To identify.
following, is
That
to
didn't-
type that thing into his computer. He is trying to follow the car, but he cannot get close enough to, because this is at night, he cannot see the tag and he does not have an opportunity to type it. He's positioning his car in the cul-de-sac, presumably to run this tag now. Officer 2 thinks, what are we doing here? This guy's dangerous. Like, we need to get out and see what this guy's doing. The windows are completely tinted out. I
Right.
cannot see what this individual is doing. He's armed. He is preparing
Which
something
you thought you
for
could-
us.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
and so
yeah.
their inclination is, let me approach the car and at least make contact with the driver so we know he knows that we are here to sort of stop and investigate this situation.
Yeah, no, I can see how it gets pieced together, and those are the things that, you know, it'll be helpful to have more additional insight into how those communications work, because there are a lot of moving pieces, you know what I mean? And not everything's gonna be communicated perfectly in every link of the chain. But, you know, it is important what gets communicated.
Sure.
Just to be abundantly clear in fairness to the complainant, this was a mistaken identity. He was not the person that they thought he was.
That's correct.
Yeah.
But what we're talking about here is what was in the minds of the officers who initiated the stop. And that's why
Right.
Officer 2 was thinking like, why haven't we done anything here? The person she believes is in the car is the person who we're describing as this known
Right.
firearms dealer, is on probation, et cetera, et
Right.
cetera.
Right.
And he's in his driveway at his home and he's been sitting in the car. So she's thinking, we don't know what he's doing in there, that sort of thing. So I just want to be clear that the complainant was not the person who was.
That's correct.
dangerous, that
Right.
they, yeah,
Right.
I just
Absolutely.
want to be sure that people are not walking away, you know, whoever listens is not walking away with an impression that this was that person.
Right.
But that's why he was so upset at him being, but this is all information that they did not learn until after the fact that it was the wrong person.
Right. Got it.
I had just one question. Sorry if it's late. I was driving down from traffic and I so as I was looking at this and hearing, we're not Monday night quarterbacking this, but I was looking, I thought there was an opportunity in the spirit of understanding person of color, you know, could be any type of situation, you know, sex, whatever. And to me, where this thing went sideways, let's get back to your question of when he said, get off my property. So the first reply was improper registration. And that was my first question. I'm assuming that's a normal response to given that situation. Is improper, is that the right terminology?
It is the proper term.
Okay, good.
Yes.
But in the case of when he asked again, you know, first answer was improper.
I know, yes.
You see where I'm
I know,
going
where-
here?
yes.
So you have to, we have to understand that,
Yeah.
that people of other races and things are very sensitive to the police. So when they ask a second time, to me, that's when I'm thinking about training. Was that an opportunity to maybe even give him just a little bit, like it might be a not valid or something, you know, just because it was more than improper that they were
Yeah.
looking at. Improper, that term
Yes.
to a person of color,
Yeah.
in this event, it's person
Yeah.
means, here again, I'm just telling you what it means to people of color is they're coming after me. And they're using that word. To me, that's why he said, get off my property. I think the thing escalated is I was just trying to piece this together. When he said, get off my property, it was after the second time using the same term of property.
Well, not only.
And he was, it sounds like he was looking for, hey, either it's bad or it's, I don't know.
I think this is what you're trying to say. So if I make a traffic stop on someone and I walk up to them and they say, why did you stop me? And I said, 462833. And then you're like, what's 462833? And I'm like, I stopped you for 462833. And you have no idea what that means. And to me, when I watch this video, when he asks a second time, that's what he's asking. You're saying a term that I actually don't know what you're talking about. And he kind of implies that when he's talking to the officer, he's like, improper. What do you mean by improper? I am not understanding this term, which is completely understandable. If you're not a police officer, you probably don't know what that means.
To a person
And so,
or a
yes.
disadvantaged person, I think it can lead to here again, the communication really at that point just went off the rails. And so it's more just, hey, I think they did a great job.
Yeah.
It's more just as we look at our community and how we can find opportunities. And to me, it's kind of a lesson learned of if it gets to that point where the second time, I agree with you. Now he's wanting to get something a little more.
A little bit
when he
more
got the same
explanation.
Answer.
Yes.
I
Add a
think
little
he
more
just went off the
explanation.
rails.
Well, I think that goes to Mummy's recommendation about soft skills training too, which I know is an active and ongoing kind of part of ACPD stuff. But, focusing on this specific incident where if I'm a community action team in Green Valley, I am aware that there are, perceptions or tensions or lack of trust or something, not with the police generally, but in this situation where if Officer 2 shows up and is like, this could be a gun carrying person who's known for not always following the rules that they're supposed to, once you've initiated that traffic stop, that ambiguity has been cleared, right? You're now interacting with somebody who's going about their day, frustrated, probably embarrassed, a bunch of things. And that's where your opportunity to turn things around and provide a little bit more explanation and communication. So that's, I think the focal element to me of what you're getting at. Is that?
Yeah, here again, nothing wrong,
I
but it
think-
just seemed like the second reply, he was looking for something more, and I don't even know what's allowed by training and policy.
Well, there wasn't a reply, and then improper change to another term. Then he's insistent, because he is correct, that his registration is valid, and then it comes to light that, oh, you didn't run it. So then what does that become? It becomes a lie, because you said something with certainty that was not true. So that's actually when he says, oh, well, now you can leave my property because you're on my property because of this thing that is untrue. We now know that I knew it was untrue the whole time. Now you know that it's untrue. Now you can leave my property. So that's where it came. And we've seen this creep up in other cases that we've looked at. For example, we looked at a case with a complainant who was at the Safeway when the initial thing was, you did this. No, I didn't. You're the suspect, or we're looking for somebody who fits the description, or it was a certainty of something that was not true. So again, it goes to that soft skills and maybe how we present the extent of what we know when we pull someone over. You fit the description of, we're investigating this, as opposed to speaking with certainty. Because like you said, in a community that has been not just policed, but persecuted by policing, it is more sensitive to, is this a made up charge? Are they just coming to me? So when you're caught in saying, the lie, that leads to, like you said, oh, wow. But one characterization I do just want to step back from, I would not say yelling and I would not say irate. This is someone who did have a raised voice, but again, accused of a crime in your yard, doing nothing. You're gonna raise your voice, but this person was not irate. This person was not cursing up a storm. This person wasn't, what was all that? They did say very forcefully, you can go now. But once you say that, go now. They did say that. But again, not in a way that it wasn't in a way where when I was observing officers that they felt they had to get in some sort of defensive posture like you would if someone was irate.
I think that's exactly the point that we're talking about, though, when we're talking about bias-free policing. Sometimes it's the characterization of someone's level of aggression that can have biased undertones. Like the way one person might look at a situation may be different, and that may be due to some sort of internal or implicit bias.
And that gets to, well, I know we've read the rationale, but that gets to kind of where I'm at with the not being able to exonerate. This is because, again, like you said, it's soup to nuts in how we look at this. So when we look at the back part of this interaction, is the determination that I can no longer speak to this person because of a bias that I have because, when these folks speak like that, then they're irate. You can't reason with them. We got to walk away. And unfortunately, I don't know because those type of questions weren't asked. And I think, and that's kind of the record that we're on right now, is that we're not asking the type of questions that really dig into bias the way that they could. So we just don't know enough to say that bias was clear throughout every point in this interaction, at least in my opinion.
Sorry, Mommy, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the discussion and throw something else out there that we were talking about from your point, Gary. I think like what I hear is when the officer is responding and saying improper, I hear a couple of different things. Like from the complainant's perspective, it's such a vague term, the word improper, and without knowing exactly like what that means, he keeps saying like, I don't know what you mean by improper.
Fired,
Exactly.
did it, right.
Right, all these different scenarios that it could, I guess, potentially be, but there are things this word is vague, but I think actually the reason why the officers, my perception watching, the way that she's speaking and, just also like the sequence of events with her coming up as backup at first and then initiating the stop, she's thinking that these tags have already been run. And so when she's answering the question improper, she's saying that with a certain sense of certainty because she believes that this has already been, initiated. I do genuinely think that that's what she was thinking. I also heard, though, some like lack of confidence in her voice and how she was interacting. And I think both officers kind of gave me that sense in terms of how the situation was uncomfortable, particularly because this person, she may be assessing a certain, amount of threat based on the, what she already had been told going into the situation. The complainant is also thinking like, I've been wrongfully stopped. So if two people interacting with each other with different levels of information, right? Like this person, my tags are proper, and the officer obviously believes otherwise. So there's like a communication gap there. But what I'm getting at here is that both of these officers seemed to me that they weren't comfortable in that situation, comfortable interacting with the complainant. And this was a relatively minor situation in the broad scheme of things, right? Which leads me to kind of the question about just, how that impacted their ability to regain control of the situation by apologizing and trying to like make it right in the moment. I think they're just trying to hurry up and get out of there because they just felt really uncomfortable with, what had transpired and the fact that they made a mistake. But I think it's really important, particularly for people who are on the community action team who are responding to particular areas where there might be like a higher crime rate or a concern from the community that they want more police presence. It goes to this kind of like broader balance of how do you balance community policing, right? Like police presence doesn't necessarily mean, when a community asks for more police presence, doesn't mean that they want to then feel like they're being unfairly harassed or targeted. I think that this was just an unfortunate set of circumstances where it was like a complete mistake. But I think like doesn't take away the fact that that's what the complainant was feeling. And that makes it even more important for people who are on these assignments to understand the kind of sensitivity of that and to make sure that they then apologize or make it right or humanize, because you don't want people to walk away from these interactions feeling any of those things or harassed or targeted, which is clearly what the complainant has not just on that occasion, but on the other occasion. I I'm a little concerned, if I understand correctly, that these assignments are so short, because I think that does not allow for, officers to, perhaps like build the rapport and the comfort level in the areas where they're, working these assignments. I don't know if it's just, 28-day cycles and then they come back to it or what have you, or what the training is going into. I'd love to learn more about that. And, see if there are areas where we can expand some of the kind of, community interactions to just kind of help build that dynamic of, that I think is just really important for community policing, to build that level of familiarity and trust and comfort. Because a lot of times, sometimes I think these situations, these interactions go a certain way because an officer just may not feel comfortable in the environment where they're policing. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well.
I would say with the 28-day cycle, people were not only on the team for 28 days and then once we did the first one, we always kept 3 people consistently the same person on the team. If you were on there first, so the 28-day cycle, that's simply our pay period. And so that's the time in which we can move people. So you always had people who had experience. And so it was to give some other opportunities to other people, they can have that as well. With that being said, while I spoke to crime analysis and some of the responses that the team had, they also did a ton of community engagement activities as well. Whether that was simply just going out speaking to people who pulled on the side of the road, where we've all seen it, meaning pull on the side of the road and stop, get out of the car to go get food out of a store or a restaurant or whatever. And so they did tons of community engagement events and community engagement activities as well, just in a very, hey, this is not something that we want to happen here. This is illegal parking. This was no tickets involved in those situations. So the community engagement was done all across the county for various needs and various reasons, including crime. So it's not just crime and people who had never worked together. There was some extenuating circumstances with that, but that's how we built the team.
I'm sorry. Oh, you were speaking in past tense just now. So is it still happening?
We did this from April 12th through October 24th.
Okay, so the CAT does not exist as a thing.
As of right now, we do plan on bringing it back for a longer term assignment, understanding when we do go through staffing, it does stop people from moving and getting new opportunities. This is one, to give people opportunities, but also to focus on some of the concerns that the community had raised and put a single set of resources to those concerns over a period of time.
I think it'd be very interesting. I don't know if it'd be maybe a write-up or a kind of a short presentation, but to actually learn more about the CAT team, especially since it's now coming back. Exactly, you talked about the kind of duty assignment they had. That wasn't necessarily a particular area, but particular maybe pockets. There was some more softer community engagement aspects of it. But that, who kind of, what are the officers that can qualify for it? Is there some sort of specialized training? A lot of us talked about soft skills. I think that'd be good. Unfortunately, when we hear about these, special teams, and when some of these special teams have crime complements, as in folks on certain crime, unfortunately, we have, there's a history out there where even the ones with the best intentions, be it as far flung as the Memphis Scorpions, or, old school, if you remember the Red Dogs out of Atlanta, run every drug dealer out of Georgia, and again, made amazing bust, but eventually, from the 80s, then by 2011, done because of how they manhandled people, or something as innocuous as Beverly Hills, and their safe streets, which, on its surface, oh, wow, we got 106 people. Oh, 105 of them were Black. Oh, Beverly Hills only has a 2% Black population. So, so not saying that we would ever go, that something like that could on its face happen to every sort of special team, but it'd be nice to know, what is the focus of this team?
Yeah, so the priority for me, first and foremost, was assigning a supervisor to be part of it. One of the things that you talk about in all the things that you named is that was a lack of supervision and determination. So that was the biggest thing, is that we had a dedicated supervisor who was working, which is one of the individual who made that contact with them. And that was for that very purpose, so they could focus on that and that alone, being those 6 people in that span of control, not 20 people, but the 6 people in a good span of control. And I think at the same time, one of the things that we did for each one of the groups before the first day is generally you're not going out to doing anything.
Yeah.
Meaning crime based, a lot of it is getting to know each other. Because, like I said, they're coming from 6 other squads. Specifically, whether it was to give out hygiene products, water, food to people who are unhoused, that was one of the first day activities, to talk about how we're going to certain situations so that they can get to know each other and understand their level of response. And that was done on every last one of the first days for each one of those groups. It was more of a community engagement first, just so we can not only get to know each other, but to generate and go out. And also there was specific training and reminders specifically in working in this environment and what you're gonna do. I will say one of the things, considering in this case, and I think in every job and in every presentation, one-on-one class you go to, what do they tell you? Stop using jargon. And I think first and foremost, I think we all are guilty in this room, probably no matter what your profession is, of using a jargon term, or you hear people say letters, just, put letters together and you're like, what does that mean?
Right.
And I think one of the things when you talk about improper means a lot of things to police officers when we hear that, but and nothing else, it means stop.
Yeah.
Right. And I think this was an opportunity where you could explain more. But I don't believe she had the information to be able to explain more. So she utilized the information that she had. And I think that was probably one of the biggest shortfalls in that.
You mentioned jargon. There was a term that one officer used, and I didn't get clarification. He repeated it a couple of times as they were talking about not having the tags not being run and then being run. And the term was, it didn't go up. It did go. He kept saying, do you have any clue what that meant? It didn't go up. He said, I thought you ran it. Well, it didn't go up. What do you mean?
It might be that he typed it and it did not appear on the MDT. Sometimes there's a delay depending on your location, the cell signal, a lot of people running tags exactly at the same time. Not going up, I'm assuming means that it did not appear on his screen. It didn't come.
Contextually, it makes sense.
So, or now that I'm reading this, now I think that's what he meant. I don't know. It's hard because I'm piecing it contextually. Yeah.
Since we're not recommending any sustained policy violations, I do want to be mindful of time. So we have another investigation to review, but I also want to make sure that Lisa, Jim, and Anika have an opportunity to weigh in if there's anything you want to add or ask.
I'm just gonna support Mummy's position on the not sustained for the bias-free policing. I feel like we need to, I think we continue to have a problem where we're not asking the right questions to get at the answers that we want. And I mean, bias doesn't mean that they're racist and doesn't mean that they're bigots. It just means that they may have some preconceived notions of perceptions of how other people communicate or react, or they don't know how to read it exactly. And I did want to say that too, because sometimes I feel like the bias makes it sound like we think the police are racist, and I'm not saying that.
Right.
But bias exists. We all have biases, and they can create frictions where people don't communicate well, and that's all that we want to get at. So I just want to say that, because I feel like we're not asking the right questions, and so we can't get to the real answer.
We want to reiterate that has recurred in every case where we've reviewed for bias-free policing, and Captain Kim has expressed their openness to our providing input on what we think that would look like, which is part of what Mummy was requesting resources for, to get an expert, somebody who has worked in this and looked at national best practice, because another area of common ground is that we all feel like national best practice is a great place to start in our review, and then it's to look at what's appropriate in Arlington and for the Arlington County specific community members and Arlington County Police specific. So I think that leads us into our recommendations, because our recommendation for bias-free policing for both officers was not sustained. And again, we have kind of reiterated that until we have a better process, it's going to be very difficult for us to exonerate until it feels like there are questions that provide the opportunity for an officer to speak in a way that, gives us the evidence or the information that we need to say, this is clearly not bias. And that's just what we're looking for with the threshold of exonerated.
Correct.
Captain Kim, was there something you wanted to add?
Well, did you want to say something? Because I had something.
I wanted to add to Charles's
Yeah.
question, the community action team was very intentionally created to focus on all 4 key initiatives.
Mhm.
Crime control and prevention is only one. So it really, and they did a ton of work in all the different areas. And when this started, we were very sensitive to what you brought up. And that's why, like Tosh was saying, there was a supervisor with everybody. So I just wanted to point that out. It's important to us to have the ability to address concerns that brought to our attention on our own or from community members. But it's also important for us to give folks in the agency an opportunity to do something different. Our staffing is pretty prohibitive. There's a lot of vacant specialty spots, so it is important to us to find opportunities for people to do something different, learn a new skill, learn something new, stay motivated, engaged. So I just wanted to add just that little bit to that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, do I hear a motion to vote on recommendations to not sustain policy violation for bias-free policing for officers 1 and 2?
I so move.
Second,
I'll second it.
all in favor, aye.
Aye.
All opposed, nay. Any abstentions? Wonderful. And then our recommendation for the constitutional rights was exonerated for officers 1 and 2. Do I hear a motion to vote to approve that recommendation?
I'll move that recommendation.
Second. All in favor, aye. Any opposed, nay. Abstentions? Wonderful. Okay, does anyone need a break or do we want to press? Break?
No.
Okay, great, wonderful. Excellent. Jim, I told you. Quick. Now, for both of these, and in between feels like the right opportunity to do so, I want to say, as Jim and I were reviewing this second case, Jim's question was, did we really need to review this one? Because going through OPR's, response, it seems like, sorry, I didn't mean to share you said.
Now,
Really,
Dan's been sitting there quiet the whole, waiting to say this. And here you go.
That's all here to say.
I heard that someone said that Jim is overheard as having said, but part of what we want to reiterate is that this process is not to be contentious or to find or create problems. And, in discussing, how are we going to handle different kinds of cases to manage the workload of both OPR and the IPA who have limited resources in addressing this is we don't really want the community to get the impression that every single case has, areas where we disagree or whatever. And so partly in reviewing the cases where we do, mostly agree and agree with the findings is to give some public visibility to the notion that, it's not every case we're reviewing that has intention or recommendations or issues. So if it feels like this is an exercise, it's actually not an exercise. It's part of the process of being comprehensive in our, transparent, our oversight purview to kind of provide transparency to the community and wanting to make sure that transparency is balanced on the side of, there is, a process in place to go through and find a lot of what the issues are. And so I think that's what we'll hear from Jim.
Excellent segue into this conversation, Chair. Thank you very much. And I think it is with that lens, and I very typically like to look at reviews in a bit of a framework, and it is in that framework that you go into it very with the lens of whether or not does the complaint match relevant policies in which we are particularly describing. So first, we're going to start with the complaint, and then we'll go into a summary, and then we'll talk about our particular types of findings. A community member submitted a complaint to ACPD through their public portal asking why officers did not arrest a person that received a notice forbidding trespassing at complainant's place of business. The complainant filed a trespass notice because a person exposed himself and conducted a lewd sexual act in front of one of his employees inside the place of business. And months later, the same person returned back to that place of business, and the employee and others inside the place of business called the police. Clayton says that the police observed the individual inside the place of business, told the person to leave, but did not arrest him for trespassing. Clayton asked why the officers did not make that arrest despite this violation of trespass terms and indecent exposure. So again, in summary, why are we reviewing this case? The complainant asked why an arrest was not made during the call of service based off of two separate incidents, one of which the trespass notice was filed, and then also that the person had exposed himself and conducted a sexual act. That said, we'll start very quickly. First, the relevant policies, preliminary and follow-up investigations, and duty and responsibilities. And we'll start, and I'll end with this same point, that I absolutely want to recognize, as Chair Evan mentioned, OPR's very thoroughness to open this case, swiftly act, talk through the findings and facts with the relevant officers, and then assign a senior officer to follow up through that investigation, sought through, got a search warrant, got an arrest, and then conducted, received an award, and then conducted an arrest. So excellent job. I think it's just an excellent point, as Chair Evans highlighted, of kind of the framework of what relevant policies, good, bad, or otherwise. Excellent job. So what happened overall? This complaint refers to two separate incidences that occurred in January and May of last year with the same particular person. An individual exposed himself and conducted a lewd sexual act inside the complainant's place of business next to another employee. The ACPD were called to the scene and responded with three particular officers. Two officers were junior officers, and the other officer was the field training officer for that day. The officers approached the individual, escorted him outside, issued a ban notice, and asked the employee to complainants and a series of other types of follow-up questions. Clayton insisted that the officer watch some recorded video of the incident that happened. However, the officers did not watch the video, despite the complainant's insistence to view the particular allegation. There was just a conversation. They didn't understand exactly what happened. So despite that, the officers did not investigate the indecent exposure or the obscene sexual display violation. At the conclusion of the call for service, the officers issued the banning notice and left the scene. Following, in May of that year, the same individual returned to the place of business, interacted with the same employee, who then called 911 but hung up. A customer then called 911, explaining the situation. Officers then responded to the scene, escorted the individual out of the place of business. Immediately afterwards, the individual departed the scene. Responding officers were unaware of that existing trespassing notice. After a brief conversation with the employee, the officers ended the call for service and departed the scene. And then, as I highlighted earlier, and then in June of that same year, so just a month later, following the OPR investigation and the complaint, senior officer went to the same place, conducted an investigation, looked at the security camera footage, resulted in a warrant and arrest of that particular type of subject. Overall, as you can see on your discussion guide on the next following page, OPR's findings along with the IPAs and our recommendations concerning three officers, not the two junior officers. Officer one was the first officer, along with the two junior officers that originally responded in January, one officer, and also the other two officers that responded back in May, all of which sustains the recommendations from us alongside OPR and IPA, all very similar. As I mentioned, I'll end with, again, following the complaint, the investigation was open and resulted in an arrest. The department took very swift action to respond and recover from this incident. And OPR very clearly highlighted it's imperative that officers understand their duties and responsibilities when responding to all calls for service, and that when individual departs the scene for trespass, further investigation might be necessary. The point was emphasized from OPR with the other officers, along with other investigation follow-up.
Yeah. The only factual addition I wanted to make was that the first officer who responded, who didn't watch the video, maybe you said this, mistakenly told the business owner that if somebody didn't see the exposure that it wasn't a crime. And that the interaction between that officer and the store clerk and business owner did kind of reflect a tension that might have warranted more kind of attention and engagement, but also relevant factually was that this is in the Roslyn area where, you know, the calls for service and the opportunity to engage is partly constrained due to some of the staffing issues that if you're getting lots of calls about, you know, people being disruptive in a certain area, that if it's that it seemed rushed, right? That there was kind of the body worn camera footage, it seemed to me like not that the interaction was rushed, but that the triaging of like what needs to be done here may have glossed over an opportunity to like look it up and double check the policy and like review duties and responsibilities may have partly been, you know, kind of owing to being spread thin across different things and straddling a training responsibility and the engagement. So those are what I wanted to raise as other facts. Mummy, would you like to add your views and context?
Sure. I don't have much to add factually on this one either. I did think that it was, you know, interesting just to observe the dynamic where you have officers who are like a one end who's like, you know, group versus an officer who has a little bit more ranking. And just, you know, that the higher ranking officer was the one that had the foremost interaction within the first incident with the store clerk. You know, just wanting to make sure, understanding why like a new recruit may not necessarily feel knowledgeable or empowered to step in if they felt like that situation should have been handled differently, which I think is perfectly understandable. Although, you know, certainly we do want to create an environment where, you know, they could have, you know, handled the situation a little bit differently if they felt strongly, or maybe pulled the other officers aside to just say, hey, should we ask more questions, or maybe we should go watch that footage. But I think that just comes with like, you know, experience and comfort. I would just underscore that, you know, I think as officers move up the rank to, you know, retrain even in areas where we think that you already are like comfortable and know, just to make sure that they're always like, you know, the sharpest with whatever the current, you know, law is or that sort of thing, because whether they want to or not, you know, I don't necessarily think that, you know, this officer thought that he was in like a supervisory position during that call for service, but obviously like newer officers are going to be looking to and expecting that they know what should be done. So I wouldn't imagine a scenario where a new recruit would have felt empowered or the need to, or even second guess that, you know, just instinctively and step in. So for that reason, I think they just, you know, officers who have more experience just bear a higher responsibility to make sure they're always sharp. That being said, I think on the second call specifically, I wanted to point out that at some point during the investigation, we realized that the ECC call that had taken place before the officers who responded to the second incident got to the store, the 911 operator, ECC is who I'm referring to, but the 911 operator, spoke to the store clerk, and based on the information that she was really kind of unable to glean from speaking to the store clerk, I had an opportunity to listen to that call, and I just have to say that I was like really disappointed with the way that operator was, you know, engaging with the complainant, or I guess in this case, the complainant is the store owner, but specifically made the call. So the person who had been, you know, victimized by the alleged suspect. There was a little bit of a language barrier. It seemed like there was, you know, kind of just not really active listening going on, just not really trying to pull the information out from that person. And so without really digging into what was going on, the ECC operator determined that nothing was taking place and then communicated that to the officer. So I just wanted to underscore that going into the call, the officers did not have the information that would have, I think, equipped them to respond differently when they got there. I think based on the investigation, we determined that at least one of the officers had acknowledged that it was like a radio dispatch that went through. So going into the call, at least one of the officers, the one who had the foremost interaction with the store clerk, thought that nothing had transpired. Obviously, they still responded to the call and then still, could have done some investigation. But I think it's important to just underscore that like officers are relying on the resources that they have from their counterparts when they go to answer these calls. And so this is not just a responsibility of ACPD, but also a responsibility of ECC to make sure that the right information is getting, extracted from the calls and then relayed to the officers. My report, I recommend that, that may be some grounds for some cross-departmental training where, there we can continue to work on making sure that communication is happening effectively. I want to make sure that our officers have all of the information that they need going into the calls, which will then give them the right resources to be able and tools to respond. That being said, I thought that it was still commendable that the police department still held the officers accountable for then, going on to the scene and, possibly having asked more questions or just detaining the suspect to figure out what had transpired. And so even though they didn't have all the proper tools for success, there was still some accountability here and an opportunity for the officers to be, just redirected on how they could have handled the situation better. And I think that is really commendable. I think it's also really commendable that the department was proactive about going back out there and making it right. Especially knowing that this situation really impacted the store clerk who was pregnant at the time and quit her job because of this distress of, constantly having to interact with this person, just not feeling safe. And I think that OPR specifically did a good job of like outlining that impact and doing what they could to swiftly make it right even before this investigation was completed. So I wanted to underscore that as well. I think that, and I just want to say, for whatever it's worth, the whole point of me pointing out the ECC part was that I think that these officers were, like less culpable in that sense that they, they're going into the situation thinking that nothing had taken place. But I do think it's still the right approach to say that even if you're not sure that something happened, it's still your obligation to go in and make sure and just, make sure that the person feels safe and that everything has been responded to. So that's all I had to say on that. But I definitely think that ECC could have done a way better job of being needed to give the officers better tools for this call.
Thank you. Captain Kim?
I don't have that much to add. I mean, thank you for bringing out the highlights as far as this. And I'll say this, which is, from our standpoint, from our office, if we do recognize that there needs to be a fix, we will address that even before the complaint is closed out. We've done that a few times already with different things that we've worked on. Whether it's failing to take a report, a crash report, a case report, whether we fail to get a warrant for an arrest of an individual. That I think for our office in general, to ensure, that we can fix whatever happened first, and then let's deal with the administrative part second. That will come, but we need to fix what happened first. And if there's something that needs to be fixed, I do want to just point out that, and thank you for, you all pointing that out. It's much better coming from you. That we do make sure that we do that first. Secondly, and this is not sort of like I read Mummy's report and I just want to make sure that I did highlight something, which is I had a follow-up with ECC about this. I told them the situation. I explained what had happened. I was like, hey, this is the thing. I really think this could have been handled a little bit better by the call taker. I understand there was a language barrier, there was some frustration there, but like I want to point this out to you so you're aware of this and can deal with it appropriately. ECC is not in our wheelhouse, and I don't have anything, but I need to bring this to your attention. And what they had told me was what the ECC administrator told me is that they're working on, I guess, purchasing. And I forgot the name of it, but it's basically a piece of software that allows their dispatchers to sort of queue up what the type of call is and then go through a checklist of making sure that all the questions you are appropriately asking. And so you're going through that checklist, all the things that you need to ask are there, and then bam, that information is relayed directly to the officer. And I do believe they intend to incorporate us when they sort of build those cue sheets out, both with fire and police. This is something that I had a long conversation about. So that is in the works already. And I believe that that is on the cusp of being purchased very soon. So I'm excited to see that, because I do think that at some point when that system goes online, being able for the officers to directly see the questions that were asked by the dispatcher and reading that on your screen as you're approaching the call could be sort of an added benefit for them information wise. Oh, the dispatcher asked how many dogs are on scene, and the person said 2 puppies and a whatever. That's different than saying 2 dogs are in the apartment, right? If I read that and it says like 2 small puppies that are less than 10 pounds, I don't really need to worry about it that much. Whereas as opposed to just seeing 2 dogs. Does that make sense? So you're just getting a little bit more, and I just see a value there that's going to hopefully be beneficial for everyone involved in this. And that's sort of kind of like tailing off the end of what Mummy was saying about working together to make sure that we get the information that we need. So
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Thank you for being proactive and reaching out to ECC to kind of drive that point home. I think it reflects a lot of what we've talked about, y'all being, responsive not just to our findings, but your own kind of, internal discoveries. So my only other comment about this, and then we'll hear discussion, was it did seem to me like, again, this is very minor, but in the interest of kind of reflecting where this body has, the opportunity to be proactive, was that the officer one in the initial interaction with the store clerk did seem to miss a little bit of tact in handling the fact that the store clerk seemed very embarrassed about talking about, a lewd sexual act and being confronted by it. And it seemed like that was possibly both gendered and cultural, and that there were 2 female officers on scene. Now, they were much more junior to the male officer. And so, I'm not making any recommendations or being prescriptive. I just want to acknowledge that if it were me, I probably would have preferred talking to a female officer about what I saw or what happened. It might have been easier for me to share information that might have led to saying like, you know what, let me watch the tape. So that was my only observation, but that doesn't deal with kind of the findings or OPR or anything like that. So that was my only other kind of hanging out in reviewing it. So board questions or comments, other inputs?
The 911 call, was that included?
No, we don't
You got a
typically
chance to-
always review them because officers don't hear the 911 calls going into the call.
Yeah.
They usually will review the CAD notes.
Right.
Not always, I guess,
Always.
depending on how quickly the situation is unfolding. But in this situation, it was particularly relevant. And so we don't always necessarily review that going into it unless there's like some sort of reason. And that's why it was something that,
Yeah, that
OPR
makes
shared
sense.
with me.
That makes sense.
When they call in the complaint, do they have the ability, because when I was watching the video, the store owner really wanted to show that footage. Do they have the ability to upload, say, hey, this is my complaint and this is the information or evidence that I have to support this complaint? Because it's such a look, that's a big gap from the January the 1st incident and then they going to investigate it and follow it up in June. That's a big gap between there.
So the January did not originate, the January incident was not a complaint.
Right.
He just kind of just let that thing slide. Then the May thing happens and he's like, enough.
Yeah.
So, which I completely understand. And that's when the complaint gets lodged.
Same question though, could we upload?
Video come to OPR or to EC? With the complaint?
Probably OPR, because when they send a complaint in, doesn't it go straight to OPR?
I think the question is, can you attach
Can you attach-
evidence of, or some other document?
To a
as
complaint?
video to a
I
complaint?
think. Well, I don't know the answer to that. Well, they'd have to email it to ACPD Internal Affairs, but if that happens and you have a video, you're like, wait, actually, so timeout. We actually do have videos that a complainant actually sent us.
So
And
that's the last case.
yeah,
he sent in a
we
video.
actually do. So
So you can, he's in his
I
nest.
think what happened is ACPD will call the complainant and say, hey, and the complainant will say, I have a video I want to share with you. And then we'll send them a link and they can download it. In this case, for
Probably
this,
not from the initial complaint, but they can provide Like it's possible, it's just not in the initial, I'm submitting this written notice.
Yes, yes, but we're always gonna follow up with the complainant, right? So that interview is always gonna take place, and that's when they can proffer, hey, I have video that I'd like to share with you. We'll send them the ACPD Internal Affairs, email address, and then the link that they can download. But in this case, the investigator went to the convenience store, talked to them in person, had the interview with them, watched the video themselves, realizes, look, I gotta fix this. This person needs to have warrants lodged against them, and they need to be arrested, or else they're gonna. And that sort of was our priority in this case. Once the investigator, looked at it, was like, I gotta send an officer down here. We gotta do something with this right now. So.
Is that back in January, when the officer said, basically, I'm not watching, basically, he was like, I ain't watching no video.
That was wrong.
Yeah, so
There's no, yeah.
ongoing, can the officer, if they are time, restricted or whatnot, can they encourage the public if they have a legitimate complaint? Hey, you just go ahead and send whatever evidence and whatever you have for us. So there's not just a big gap from like this.
Yeah, so I know what you're asking, and then yes, okay, but here's how you need to handle that call in January. You go there, you talk to the complainant. He tells you this guy did something really gross inside the convenience store. I have a video of it. Great, let's go up there and watch it. We watch it together in your little booth or your little office, and I'm like, man, I really need that video for evidentiary purposes. Here's the link. I need you to download this. Or if he's like, I can't even do that with my antiquated system, no problem. I take my body worn camera, I play the video, and I just hover that thing right over the monitor, and I capture the video that way. It's not preferred, but that is a way for antiquated systems that we cannot do this. They scratch out a police report and they say, this day, this person did this, blah, blah, blah. Here's the evidence. Here's the information. Let's go swear out a warrant for this person if we know who he is. And in this case, in January, they actually had him downstairs. What's your name? What's your date of birth? Okay, let's go swear out a warrant for his arrest. Let's go arrest him, et cetera, et cetera. That is the proper way to handle that call. And so that is kind of a long way of saying, yes, you can give them a link, but it shouldn't even got to that. It should have been, let me watch this video right now. I will record it myself, or I will deal with the evidence collection. If that is not preferred, then I will give them an email to send them a link, and they're going to upload it and attach it to this case report. So does that answer your question?
All officers. Now, I don't know how you go back and educate the officers on.
They know what I just described to you. That is common practice / procedure. Okay. That is what needs to happen at those types of calls. That's part of the FTO training process about how to take a report and collect evidence. This person just did not do that. I mean, there's no other way than me saying like, there's a way to do it, which I just described. That's how it's done. And there's a way not to do it, which is kind of what happened here.
And so notice, is that putting your little system there type in and
yes, it gets uploaded into the system. You pull their name and date of birth up, it populates into our records management system, and I can see that trespass notice literally scanned in, and it shows and populates right there.
So the officer just didn't look into the system.
So in January, they issued the notice.
No, I'm talking about the May.
The May notice, the problem in May was they didn't do anything. They didn't ask about whether it was trespass. They didn't ask for follow-up questions of it. They didn't do a lot of things. But that store clerk had a copy of the trespass notice and could have shown it to them. I'm not saying it's their responsibility, but they actually had a copy of it, and they could have been like, hey, this guy just walked away. He's been barred from here. And you just escorted him out of here. So this was a misdemeanor committed in your presence. You know what I mean? So you don't even need to go to the magistrate's office at that point. This is a misdemeanor that was committed in your presence. You can absolutely do a custodial arrest for that, or issue a citation if you think it's appropriate.
Thank you. Other questions or input? Charles?
This one good thing. It goes back to communication gap, because it appeared to me that there was an attempt by the store clerk to mention that that the process had already been done to get that. because the officer did say, well, you know, you can get a transfer. She said, oh, she made it clear that she did something, but again, it wasn't followed up and it wasn't articulated so clear as to get the officer's attention that this thing already existed, like you said, that she had on her. I do have just three quick questions. One is just to highlight something that even ACB OPR highlighted, but to ask kind of a little bit of clarifying questions on it. As you all saw in the video, I guess in our time frame, not suspect anymore, but in our time frame when we're looking at the case, suspect, he was clearly evidencing some sort of health distress, whether mental or just generally physical. So even if the suspect had not done what the suspect did do, it seems as though, and I think OPR kind of hints to this, that another appropriate action would have been to try to get this person the appropriate, help to, so could you just talk a little bit more about, how the officers are empowered in that, or more so duty bound in that situation? Or, is it just a nice thing like, oh, if you see they're drunk or been out of the way, oh, it'd be nice if you did it? Or is it one of those things where, you know what, you definitely should have walked away from asking questions, but also in this level of distress, you definitely should have walked away from that?
So the threshold for an emergency custody order, which we commonly refer to as a paperless ECO, right? So there's a paper ECO, which the magistrate issues. You can swear out an emergency custody order in front of a magistrate. They'll issue a document that says, take this person into custody. Or there's a paperless ECO, which means that if I observe you and I see that you are a danger to yourself or others, or you are unable to care for yourself, then I am duty bound to do an emergency custody, a paperless ECO on you. Basically, I need to detain you for a mental health evaluation. That's if I believe that you are experiencing some mental health crisis. Now, there's this other piece that I think is referred to in the OPR report, which is like being intoxicated. And so I think what we're trying to point out is this officer is saying that, hey, he's either intoxicated or, maybe suffering from some mental health crisis. If that's the case, you did nothing to further this investigation to determine and ensure that this individual's level of intoxication would allow them to walk about. You can be, quote unquote, I guess, buzzed or intoxicated and not be subject to arrest in Arlington, okay? Depending on your level, right? If you're stumbling around, you're probably going to have to be arrested just for your own safety, right? You don't want you stumbling out into traffic. Same thing with being, sort of suffering a mental health crisis. You can be suffering a mental health crisis as long as you don't meet one of those criteria, which is unable to care for yourself or a danger to yourself or others. If you don't meet one of those criteria, then that paperless ECO does not fit you. Like, we cannot do that legally. We cannot detain you for an emergency custody order. However, in this circumstance, if he's alleging that he's observing these characteristics of this individual, then it calls into question, well, then why aren't you furthering your suspicion to determine whether or not this person is okay to go away? And this is a way of us saying, you went in there, you're making all these claims about, hey, I don't have to do this, I don't have to do this, I don't have a right to detain him. It's like, hold on a second, if you can't claim two things at one time, basically. So does that answer your question?
Right.
Okay.
So it's again very good that that was pointed out, and for the public to understand that if someone's in a way, we do expect our officers to evaluate that to see
correct
what services they could have. Another thing is with regard to, I know some of the officers kind of were not as familiar with 182, 387. Right, exactly.
And then 387.
But I mean, there's 67 titles in Virginia, so I don't expect you to be familiar with everything, right? So my question is, and it goes to kind of resources. We need more resources, ACD's resources. But what resources do we have for officers when it comes to understanding what possible codes a particular situation? What may be fulfilled in a particular situation as far as meeting the standards of something that could be a criminal act?
This happens all the time. Officers have this.
Okay.
This is the best tool that you can have if you are doing a street level investigation and are uncertain about the particulars of a specific code.
Yeah.
If you type in 182387 right now, it will give you, and it's very short. It actually is not a very long code section.
It isn't.
And it tells you exactly what the criteria is, and it's not very vague. It's very specific. And if he had just taken 2 seconds to type this into his Google search bar, he would have been able to read the code and realize, well, wait a second, you know, this meets this criteria. At least I should investigate that a little bit further. But this
So,
is the best.
so the department itself doesn't have any sort of tool where an officer can put in certain elements and see, you know, like, okay, you know, this, and that means probably 182, 387.
The tool is the training that you receive at the academy and the continued legal training and updates that you receive every year when the legislature changes the laws.
Right.
And so there is a foundation for 5 months that's provided to you as a new trainee about all the base level codes. What is shoplifting? What is robbery? What is indecent exposure? All those, and then traffic codes are all, you kind of get the foundation. Those things, I can probably assure you, if you look at the changes in this section, 8387, it starts in 1960, and then the last modification was in 1994. These base level foundational violations of crime don't change dramatically year to year, if that makes sense. There's new codes that are adopted by the legislature, but when you're talking about robbery and shoplifting and indecent exposure, these things, very little changes year after year. So you get that when you're a recruit at the academy foundational.
There you go. And then my last question is just about clarifying my understanding of discipline, because we do also look at, discipline. And a lot of what we're talking about comes back to the need for additional training. Can you tell me how additional training happens if a letter of correction is given versus shift counseling?
Additional training, that can be part of the recommendation. So if there's always a recommendation that is given with the outcome of a sustained violation.
Right.
That recommendation can include discipline, can include what it's going to be, shift level counseling, and that can include further training, right? So like, I think you should, do this, this, and this. Is there further training that could be done? Yeah, I can make that argument, but that was done during the interview, which was like, do you know what the code section is? Let me show you what the code section is. That was actually done during the interview. Right. And so, it was kind of an aha moment for the officer to be like, oh yeah, you're right. And so, I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, you're getting at, because, you talk about training a lot. So I was wondering, shift level counseling, within counseling, you can already intimate, counseling means training. I'm talking more about
this.
Correct. But then within a letter of correction, it's, well, you're reading that the behavior was not correct.
You're signing.
But is there more?
Yes, the letter has, the letter has
in
everything that went wrong in that call.
Right.
And basically saying, hey, this is this. And then there could be, with that recommendation, additional training that's recommended as part of that sort of package. We talked about packages that are delivered to people. So.
But that doesn't have to be.
Okay.
You may not see it in the letter,
Mhm.
but it doesn't mean that it's not part of the overall.
Perfect. Thank you. Those are my questions.
One thing to
Yeah.
that, too, a letter, though they receive a letter that has all the information that we just discussed, that's not like sent through snail mail or anything like that. You're actually sit down with your supervisor and there is more conversation that takes place in regards to, so it's not designed to be like, here, I'm giving you this, you go, no. They don't get it. The officer just doesn't get it. The supervisor gets it. And then there's a sit down conversation.
Okay. There you go. Thank you so much. Very helpful. Thank you. That's it.
Okay. Our recommendations, to reiterate, are to sustain the allegations for all 3 officers on both violations, preliminary follow-up investigations, and duty responsibilities. Before we vote, are there other questions or comments? Do I hear a motion to adopt all recommended findings that all allegations against all officers are sustained?
So moved.
Second? All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstentions? Wonderful. Okay, So we do have some, more public participation. So we'll open the floor for, yeah.
I'll take a vote on this.
Oh, so sorry. Thank you. Okay, for the second case, sorry. Where I was. Do we hear a motion to, hold on. I lost my place. That's what happens when you have to do papers. We need to vote on the sufficiency of disciplinary action against the officers, which we'll note was taken into account the seniority of the officers. Do I hear a motion to, where am I? No, I'm sorry, for our discussion, I just can't find it. Okay. Do we hear a motion to approve the recommended finding that disciplinary action was sufficient?
Also.
Second,
Second.
all in favor, aye. Any opposed, nay? Abstentions? Thank you for your patience. That was the, God, I don't want to say blonde moment. I feel like that's biased, but okay. So we will, I think we're close enough to the end. We're not going to take a break. We'll open the floor for 10 minutes of public comment. Does anyone online have input they'd like to share with the group? Hearing none.
I'll just say thank you. Appreciate all the good work. Thank you.
Thanks, Louie.
Yeah.
I'll give it a second in case anyone else is trying to get off mute. Otherwise, we will go to our IPA report out. Tommy?
Yeah, thank you. Just very quickly, I sent out the other day a progress report to you all, as well as the county manager and the county board, just kind of detailing any sort of any updates that we have on the status of any in progress or closed investigations, as well as any sort of administrative updates. So that should be in your inbox. Also, we'll be hopefully publishing the public newsletter this week as well. We just wanted to update some of the classifications and the categories that are usually linked to the public newsletter, which is the investigation tier system. So I just wanted to make sure that was up to date before publishing the newsletter, so that when you click on the link in the public newsletter, it's going to lead you to the most up-to-date categories. And I've also provided some examples of what kind of goes into those categories, because I thought that it might be helpful to have some, for just a member of the public to have some examples. Just generally speaking, like what kind of things get categorized in what areas. And then I usually publish the quarterly progress report on the 10th of the month after the quarter finishes. So please expect that in your inboxes by Friday. Any questions about those, please do let me know. And just as a reminder, investigations where we did do an actual administrative interview, but kind of what came out of those administrative interviews was still like a lack of information to be able to either sustain or exonerate, or we ended up in a non-sustained posture because there just wasn't a lot of information that we were able to glean. Usually those are situations where there's not like body worn camera footage for the underlying incident. Maybe just we don't have a lot of information to know whether or not something happened or didn't happen. Those sort of complaints, because they are not likely to go forward to the COB for this type of full review, I've been including those with a couple sentences or a paragraph at most in the quarterly progress report at the end of the quarterly progress report. The quarterly extent report. So it'll be the information about those complaints will be presented along with the information where you get the kind of details about which complaints were exonerated by DENS or found to be non-investigative, like basically all of the complaints that don't fall within the category of warranting a full level review that then comes before the COB. So if you have any questions about those, feel free to ask. And also at any point, if you all feel differently that you want to, you know, take those matters up or produce a report or that sort of thing, you can always flag those, and you know, you will have access to that, those investigations and that footage. If you ever want to go back and look at any of those items as well. But I'm trying to make sure that we are utilizing our resources effectively, and, you know, kind of weaning down on the types of cases that we are putting this kind of full process into, because of obviously you're meeting just once or twice at most a month. And obviously we want to be focusing in on the cases where there is a lot of like points of discussion, or they're going to have the biggest impact on the community. Similarly, cases where I look at the complaint or look at or listen to the complainant's interview and determine that, you know, whatever the underlying issue is in the complaint is not one that I think warrants like additional IPA or COB involvement. Sometimes I am provided with body worn camera footage associated with it. Sometimes I don't need body worn camera footage. It just depends on the circumstance. But those may be, you know, things related to like a parking complaint or things like that, that I think just are not the types of complaints that are going to have more of a profound impact on the community. And so just kind of prioritizing ones that we think are going to lead to, you know, more of an impact or more of, you know, policy considerations or different things like that. So those are the ones that I've begun to categorize as ACPD only. And, you know, we're just kind of refining the process as we go. After having done these investigations for a little over a year now, we're starting to kind of be able to recognize like where we can have the most impact on continuing to, you know, build positive and trusting interactions between the community and the police. So I just wanted to highlight some of those categories. I think it's probably a repeat for you all. I've seen this information before, but just also to make sure that it's articulated for the public, so that they understand kind of how we are moving about prioritizing these complaints and investigations, and paying particular attention to ones that we think are really kind of helping to meet our mission and underscore what we're doing here. So those are the only kind of larger updates that I have now. Again, if you all have any questions about the progress report or the newsletter or the quarterly XDEMS report, I'm always happy to answer any of those questions.
Thank you. Any questions or comments from Moby? Excellent. Okay, we will move to approve the previous meeting minutes. And we'll put those up. I reviewed this and didn't see any issues, so unless folks have something specific, just making sure we've got eyes on.
And this has been shared with all of you, should be.
Thank you. Questions or comments on the last meeting minutes? Any amendments or a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, aye. Any opposed, nay? Abstentions? Wonderful. Okay, a few minutes for open discussion. I'll just remind us that our next meeting is May 29th, 3 weeks from today. I think we had some attendance challenges with the 22nd. So I'll reach out to coordinate with y'all on what we'll review and make sure we don't have any other scheduling conflicts. The meeting after that will be the 29th, and then June 12th are our next two meetings. So we'll get those booked on the county calendar and notice with agendas. Any other elements from the COB members before we adjourn?
No, I mean, I do look forward to learning more about this, the CAT 2.0. It'd be good, you know, especially, you know, the term proactive policing was used, you know, it's like kind of what that means. I always thought policing was proactive anyway. So, but I look forward to kind of learning more about that as it develops. And one thing that did pop into my mind during the meeting, and I don't know if it's gonna be more work for you, I probably should ask first. But I know, right? But I was thinking that, amongst us, we know what we do, we all know what we do. But then I keep thinking that a lot of the police officers, unless the few who did the ride-alongs with us, may not know. So, it'd be awesome if there was, I don't know, I know you all do like not Monday, morning meetings and stuff like that for officers, but I don't know if it would be us or probably more appropriate if it was Mummy, if she could like attend those in just like 5 minutes to say like what we do. Cause like that's a lot of people who I just realized did not know what we do. So sorry if it's more work for you, but, I don't know if that's something that you all like do, like you would have 5 minutes for, but I think that'd be a really interesting thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's it. Sorry if I gave you more work.
No. You're referring to like roll calls and those.
Yeah, that's what they're called, morning.
Yeah. No, Andy and I have talked about that. I definitely,
okay.
view attending roll calls and that sort of thing as community engagement. Officers are obviously members of our community as well. I think the sentiment was that we wanted to kind of operationalize this a little bit, and that officers kind of wanted to see, I don't want to speak for you, Chief, kind of what this was once we got kind of into the full swing of doing investigations and meetings and whatnot. So it might be the appropriate time to reapproach that conversation now. And now that we've done a couple, and hopefully officers have had an opportunity to view some of these meetings and see kind of, how they're, how we're conducting them and how they're progressing, and probably have like questions now that hopefully I'll be able to answer. And, certainly want to demystify the process. And I certainly think it's important that if an officer ever does find themselves in a position where they are in an administrative interview, I'm reviewing it remotely. I'm watching the interview remotely. And so I would like for them to be able to put a face to it and know like who's looking at these, and, that we are listening for, from the perspective of like how we can do things better and not from a punitive perspective. So I certainly welcome the opportunity.
I always imagined it was you two kind of sitting in a room watching on camera the interview.
That's actually
Yeah.
true.
Right. Just sitting there
Yeah.
like just
Right,
on
that's-
these.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
On Eber, just
Yeah,
watching.
but you don't want it to feel like,
Right,
like
right.
big bad wolf or something watching remotely from,
But anyway, but like I said, sorry, it's more work, but I'm glad to hear that you all already have this idea. And so I look forward to it happening, and hopefully we can hear some reports back that it's well received.
Yeah.
Cool beans.
Other kind of outstanding coordination items other than ACPD's meeting request is we did speak after the last meeting about, we are, for the public's benefit, our training requirements each year kind of are somewhat at our discretion, and that's partly to pursue topics that, come up. And so part of what we talked about is that as we look at incidents where a weapon is being drawn, we want to take in information that will inform us and give us the ability to understand. So that's something that we'll work with ACPD also, again, as kind of a co-creation of this process. We'll look to do that in conjunction with things like, figuring out how to attend roll call and how to kind of triage complaints as they come in. So I don't have anything else urgent tonight. I think we'll have a couple of other updates at our next meeting. And so we can adjourn early tonight. It's probably in everyone's best interest. So I'll declare the meeting adjourned. We addressed all the agenda items, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys in a couple weeks. As always, reach out if you've got questions. Thank you all for your very, very diligent efforts here.
While we are all here, would it be possible for us to hopefully have a conversation about